Almost every composer I know wants to write for orchestra, and the competition to get your piece programmed on an orchestral concert is fierce. So when you have your big shot at writing for orchestra, you want to be sure to make the most of it. But here's the thing. I've seen composers spend months on an orchestra piece only to have it fall flat in rehearsal. The orchestra struggles, the conductor gets frustrated, and the composer realizes too late that something fundamental was missing. What if I told you 3 simple questions asked before you orchestrate a single note could prevent that? In this video, I'm going to show you these questions. These 3 factors explain why Beethoven is secretly a bad model for orchestration, why clarity and complexity aren't actually in competition with each other, and why even if you write clear, playable music, your score can still fall flat. So let's dive in. When I was an undergraduate, I was fortunate for the orchestral opportunities I received, but it wasn't all sunshine and butterflies. My orchestra piece, Summer Had 10,000 Stars, was selected for performance by our top college orchestra, and they scheduled a reading session months before the concert so I could hear my ideas, how they were shaping up, and make some tweaks. I walked into that rehearsal thinking I'd just be taking a few notes on some balance issues, maybe cleaning up a few dynamics. But instead, I watched these excellent college musicians struggle with some passages I thought were straightforward. The conductor stopped multiple times not because the music I had written was bad, but because something about how I'd written it had made it unnecessarily difficult. That reading session taught me more about orchestration than any textbook ever had. Years later, when the Cincinnati Symphony selected that same piece for ACO's Earshot program, I went through another round of revisions. Through experiences like these, I realized that effective orchestration isn't about complexity or cramming into my score every clever device that I had gleaned from Debussy or Stravinsky. It's about something much more fundamental. So here's how I think about effective orchestration. I can sum it up in a single sentence. Effective orchestration amplifies musical ideas. That's it. Effective orchestration amplifies musical ideas. And it amplifies musical ideas in 3 dimensions. Number 1, it makes them easy for players to understand and execute. Number 2, it ensures that audiences can hear each musical layer and follow the musical argument. And 3, it adds richness to musical ideas and heightens the contrast between layers and sections so that each idea pops. Now, the 3rd dimension is the one that most composers obsess over first. That's actually backwards, and I'll show you why in a minute. As you write for orchestra, here are the 3 questions that will help you critique your orchestrations. The first question you have to ask is this playable? Playable begins with your writing being physically possible. It starts by not writing any notes out of the instrument's range. From there, making sure that the dynamics are easy to produce at the given pitches and rhythms, that wind and brass players are given sufficient time to breathe and rest their embouchures, and that fingerings respect the different physical realities of the various instruments, whether it's something like this, or something like this, or something like this. And of course, the detailed fingerings of what flute or maybe oboe or violin or viola actually is. In addition to being physically possible, effective orchestration is idiomatic. In other words, it respects the limitations and takes advantage of the strengths of each instrument. Orchestration is about more than choosing a tone color that you like. It's about understanding the nuances of what's possible or not on every instrument. As a result, you typically can't substitute, say for instance, a violin part for a trumpet part. Such substitutions often would not work because, like a bespoke suit or evening gown, effective orchestrations tailor each part specifically to the instrument. Lastly, effective orchestrations are as easy as possible. This includes both the ease of the individual parts, as well as how easily the ensemble can coordinate the separate parts. Now, this is the Beethoven bit. There's a famous story about Beethoven that illustrates exactly why this matters. During one rehearsal, a violinist complained about a passage that was written awkwardly for the instrument. Beethoven's response? "When I composed that passage, I was conscious of being inspired by God Almighty. Do you think I can consider your puny fiddle when he speaks to me?" That's the thing. Beethoven can get away with that attitude. He was Beethoven. But the rest of us? Orchestra players rightly dislike playing needlessly virtuosic passages, especially when no one can hear their part. This does not mean that orchestral music cannot at times be difficult or virtuosic, but that you should know how difficult what you're writing is, and whether that difficulty is both essential to and audible in the result. For instance, let's say that you write a Debussy passage for the strings, where all the musicians are playing different arpeggios and scales. That probably creates a really cool texture. I'm imagining such a passage in my mind. I'm like, wow, I want to write that now. But if the brass are blasting away in the same register, no one's going to hear the strings, even if you mark them quadruple forte. That's not just an imbalance issue, it's a playability issue because you're asking players to work incredibly hard for nothing. In fact, I've personally heard from world-class orchestra musicians gossiping and griping about this very problem. These are players who love new music and can play almost anything, but they still justifiably resent it when composers inadvertently make all of their practice in vain. Beyond playability, the next most important question you need to ask for effective orchestration is this: is it clear? Clarity begins with effective notation. Each articulation, dynamic, and indication needs to be what the player expects to indicate a particular sound. These markings must also occur on the page where and how players expect them. For instance, string pizzicato is written as P-I-Z-Z period in Roman text above the staff, directly above the note that it's supposed to start on. If you put it below the staff in italics, or if you put it before the thing starts or after the passage starts, players will often miss it. Another classic example is hairpins. In chamber music, composers often write hairpins with no dynamics on either side. In an orchestral setting, players who see a naked hairpin will always ask, what dynamic are we supposed to go to? The expectation in orchestral music is that you spell it out for them every time. Clear orchestrations also use deliberately chosen textural designs. A textural design is the overall relationship of the parts to one another. It considers the rhythmic relationships and the melodic relationships of the parts, as well as the roles that these parts play. For example, textural designs could be monophony, or a chordal texture, or a melody and accompaniment texture. There are actually 10 basic textural designs altogether, and in fact, leave a comment below if you want me to make a video about them. So, okay, there are 10 basic textures. What does that mean for clarity? Think about the difference between melody and accompaniment versus chordal textures. In melody and accompaniment, you want the melody to pop out, so maybe you give it to a solo oboe while the strings play the harmony underneath. But in a chordal texture, where the emphasis is on the chords, you want the multiple lines to blend together into single harmonies. So you might assign these lines to instruments with similar timbres, like oboe, low clarinets, and bassoons. That's what clear orchestrations do. They balance each element within these textural designs using register, tone color, tone heft, and dynamics. The goal is to blend together the layers that should be heard together, so for instance, chord tones within a harmony, to contrast the layers that should sound separate, so for instance, a melody from its accompaniment, and to ensure that the overall texture sounds balanced. Lastly, clear orchestrations help articulate the formal dimensions of a piece. They accentuate melodic arrivals and cadences within phrases, they demarcate the different sections, and they work in tandem with harmony and melody to create predictability, tension, and surprise. For instance, in Jerry Goldsmith's classic theme for Star Trek: The Motion Picture, Goldsmith gives each section of the main title to a different group of instruments. In the introduction, the melody is played by the strings. Then, the A theme is given to the trumpets, the B theme shifts to the horns. When the A theme returns, the trumpets take it again. After a modulation, the B theme moves to the strings, before the strings, trumpets, and winds play the A theme together one last time. Each section is clearly defined by a particular instrumentation. Now, the last question you need to ask for compelling orchestration is the fun one. Is it vivid? Playability keeps you out of trouble. Clarity makes sure that your ideas come across. But vividness, this is what makes your orchestration pop. This is what makes an audience lean forward in their seats, what makes conductors excited to program your piece, and what separates competent orchestration from orchestration that people remember. The first level of vividness is idiomatic writing. Idiomatic writing is about more than just your part being playable, it's what makes it sound orchestral. It amplifies the nuances and characteristics we expect of the different instruments. For instance, double, triple, quadruple stops, these are like the herbs and spices of string writing. Yeah, you can orchestrate without them the same way that you can make a meal without herbs and spices, but in both cases, the result will be bland. When you use these characteristic sounds, when you write multi-stops for strings, suddenly your string section sounds like a string section, and not just single accented notes that could have been played by any instrument. In fact, Beethoven's actually a good example of this. So in Beethoven, if you look at his symphonies, you'll see triple and even quadruple stops all over the place. They're just a fantastic way to create really punchy accents that emphasize whatever other accents are happening in the orchestra. And it's not just Beethoven. If you look across the orchestral literature to the present day, you'll see examples of multi-stops all over the place. It's a very common device, and if you're not using it, you should. The next level of vividness is color and articulation. Vivid orchestration revels in contrast and nuance. It's highly particular. Not this string sound, but that one. Not any brass mute, this specific one. Not that register in the vibraphone, this one. In fact, if you don't get any more specific than simply assigning pitches and rhythms to your instruments, your orchestration will sound bland. Most of all, effective orchestration is literate in the various orchestral devices. These are devices like doubling, dovetailing, contrasting plucked sounds with sustained ones. There are dozens of such orchestral devices. They not only serve to make your music more vivid, they show that you're literate in the orchestral tradition, that you know Debussy and Mahler and Brahms and Beethoven and Augusta Reed-Thomas and other contemporary composers working today. So before you orchestrate your next piece, pause and ask yourself these three questions. Is it playable? Is it clear? And is it vivid? Get the first two right, and the third becomes possible. Skip the first two, and even the most colorful orchestration in the world won't save you. Now, if you want to see what effective orchestration looks like in practice, how a master like Mahler balances playability, clarity, and vividness, I have another video where I break down the Adagietto from his Fifth Symphony to analyze his string scoring in detail. Click right here to watch that next.